Archie Sonic, IDW Sonic, Archie Sonic, IDW Sonic, Archie Sonic, IDW Sonic. Both Sonic comics are great. They're full of exciting adventures and lovable characters. But between the two of them, I have to say overall, I like Archie Sonic just a tiny bit better. Don't get me wrong, there are things I love about IDW Sonic over Archie, and there are some things about Archie that come very close to ruining it for me. Today, I'm going to compare these two stories and explain why I like Archie Sonic better. I'm also going to critique Archie and say what I think could have been done better. But first, if you enjoy my content, please make sure you hit subscribe and ring the bell. Or don't ring the bell, I don't really care that much. First thing I should say about Archie Sonic is that it's not really the kind of comic you can pick up the latest issue at the store and immediately know what's going on. Many of the story elements go back literally hundreds of issues, and some aren't even explained in the main story. You have to read the spin-offs. Many people would consider this a downside, but I disagree. In fact, this is perhaps what piqued my interest in the comic so much. There was so much world building put into this. They took the world of Sonic SatAM, a world that you'd know very little about from watching the show alone, and just fully decked it out. Look at this map of Sonic's planet. You can actually see not only all the locations in the comic, but exactly where they are in relation to one another. There's a whole history of this planet recorded in the complete Sonic Encyclopedia. The characters frequently talked about people and places and events that I, the reader, had no context for, but there was context. Sometimes the context was an event in an issue that came out before I was even born. So the Archieverse just felt so full. The IDW world feels rather empty in comparison. It's like every issue takes place in another area, but I never find those areas that interesting. I mean, are we on an island, on a continent, in a simulated reality, or what? But hey, there's Green Hill Zone for the dozenth time. Speaking of which, has it been established at this point that Sonic lives in Green Hill Zone? At least in the game universe. I mean, I guess it would make sense, since that's the first location of Sonic's first adventure, but I don't really like that. Where are all the houses? And who built all these totem poles? Is it like some kind of religious thing? I might be more okay with Sonic living in Green Hill if that particular area was a bit more built up. In Fleetway's Sonic the Comic, Sonic lived in Emerald Hill Zone, and that place was very well built. Anyway, as far as the IDW comics are concerned, Sonic appears to live at Tails' house in Emerald Town. I guess we could assume that he lived in Green Hill before he met Tails, but why did he move in with him? Sonic's residence in the Archie comics is way better in my opinion. Sonic started out living with his uncle in the city of Mobotropolis, the capital of the Kingdom of Acorn, because his father was out fighting the war. When Dr. Robotnik invaded the city, he and some other children were safely escorted to the underground village of Knothole, in some undisclosed location in the Great Forest, where they would grow up under the care of Rosie Woodchuck. See? That's how you world build. Sega has this stupid rule that says Sonic can't have family characters. Well, when you make your titular character a kid, that doesn't exactly make things easy. But here's a creative way you can explain why he doesn't have a family, and how he was able to survive all these years without one. Oh, but Knothole isn't in the games, so what? It's way more aesthetically pleasing. Sonic shouldn't live in an area that looks like a level from a 2D side-scroller. Actually, the fact that there are almost no locations in Archie that came from the games is something I like. The whole purpose of the locations in the games is to offer a unique gameplay experience. The comics only need to tell a good story. Green Hill Zone and Chemical Plant Zone don't tell good stories. The only real purpose they serve is as a nod to the audience. Hey, remember that from the games? Remember that from the games? Remember? So I don't really understand why they don't do this with the IDW comics. Like, come on. You don't need to rehash the Sonic SatAM/Archie story. Just give a new backstory for Sonic, explain to us where this dude lives and why he doesn't have a family. And build up the world, for Pete's sake. I want to see a new map with all the new locations. Archie gave us a map of Sonic's planet 53 issues in. We're like 70-something issues into IDW Sonic, and we still have no freaking clue what Sonic's world looks like or where everything is. Step up your game, Ian. Give us a new map. And it better not be a dog turd map like the one in Sonic Forces. And then again, this comic does canonically take place directly after Sonic Forces, so I understand if you're obligated to make it like that. I consider starting the story off from the end of Sonic Forces to be kind of a missed opportunity for IDW. Let's go back to Archie. The first issue of Archie starts us out at the very beginning, when Dr. Robotnik took over the planet. It doesn't go that deep into how he did it, because the story is meant to be told from a 5-year-old Sonic's perspective. All we know is that one day, some robots marched into the city, kidnapped Sonic's uncle and his dog, and destroyed his business. And then Sonic met Princess Sally, she introduced him to the Freedom Fighters, and now we've got ourselves a central conflict. Robotnik's taken over the world, and it's up to Sonic and the Resistance to take it back. Similarly, Sonic Forces tells another story of how Dr. Eggman took over the planet. This is something unprecedented in the Sonic games. Dr. Eggman's been trying for years to conquer the world, and Sonic has always stopped him. Many fans were shocked and unleashed when he finally achieved his dream of building Eggman Land. So for him to go as far as to conquer the entire world is a major feat. But at the end of the game, you defeat him, the Eggman Empire collapses, and the conflict's over. Now, you would think that defeating Eggman would be the end of a saga. It's time to turn the chapter, to find a new purpose for Sonic, a new conflict. And at the start of the IDW comics, that's exactly what it looks like. Dr. Eggman is no longer a threat. However, his robots are still running about, and it seems as though they're being controlled by someone. This someone is eventually revealed to be Neo Metal Sonic. Awesome! It's only fitting that the new villain of the series be the magnum opus of Dr. Eggman. This is going to be really interesting. Oh wait, he was defeated 12 issues in. 12 issues! That's barely a year of new conflict. And it's even worse when you consider the fact we didn't even know who the new villain was until issue 7. So really, there were only 6 issues, 6 months, in which there was a new central conflict and we knew what the conflict was. And then it was over before it even began. And as soon as Metal was defeated, guess who became the new villain? No, really, guess. Dr. Eggman. Yup, he wasn't really defeated after all. I guess Shadow was right to get mad at Sonic for not killing the bastard when he had the chance. You know, you can't really make Shadow out to be the bad guy when his takes are 100% correct. If Dr. Eggman had kept being Mr. Tinker throughout the series, yeah, Shadow would seem pretty cruel to suggest Sonic kill him. But it wasn't that long after this he regained his memories and launched his most dangerous evil plan ever. Yes, one even more evil than taking over the world. The Metal Virus arc had some of the highest stakes we'd ever seen. This thing literally had the potential to wipe out all life on the planet. And while it was really cool of an arc to read, I couldn't help but to think the whole time, this is all Sonic's fault. Just one different action could have stopped all this. Don't get me wrong, Dr. Eggman is an awesome villain. He's one of my favorite villains of all time. But unless there's some kind of central conflict that revolves around him, I wouldn't mind just leaving him to be the villain in the games. This kind of story where Dr. Eggman just does a new bad thing every issue isn't really sustainable in my opinion. The audience is gonna get sick of that after a while. One thing that got me thinking of this was issue 65. For context, this was 4 issues after Sonic and the Restoration destroyed the Imperial City. This enormous mechanical city that was absorbing all the surrounding resources and threatened to expand over the entire surface of the planet. Well, in this issue, Knuckles and the Chaotix invade Eggbase Delta thinking Eggman has an Echidna artifact, and so Eggman comes in on this floating television demanding they stop because he, quote, hasn't had the time to start up a new scheme. Yeah, no der, Eggman. A hero isn't supposed to wait for the bad guy to harm others again before stopping him again. You shouldn't even have Egg-Base Delta, let alone be allowed to take refuge there. And then when Dr. Eggman explains to Knuckles that he doesn't have the artifact, they all just leave. Yep, sorry for breaking all your evil robots. We know you were sorry for breaking all your evil robots. We know you were planning to use them to kill us, but since you were a good boy today, we'll just let you continue plotting your revenge against us. It's cool. You're no real threat anyway. Can you imagine this happening in Archie? There was an issue where Knuckles found Dr. Eggman lying defenseless on Angel Island and seriously considered murdering him right then and there. In another issue, Sonic started beating the crap out of Eggman just for showing up at his front door. That's because Dr. Eggman was the entire source of the story's conflict, and that's why issue 200 will always be one of my favorite issues ever. The whole lifelong battle between Sonic and Robotnik finally reaches its epic conclusion. For context, this arc came after a long period in which the series kind of felt like it had reached a stopping point. The last major development, in my opinion, came in issue 117. Let me ask you something. What had been Dr. Eggman's #1 goal throughout the series? What was the one thing he needed to do to claim ultimate victory? Find out where Knothole is. He had the resources at his disposal to destroy entire nations. The Freedom Fighters only managed to maintain a toehold against his empire using coordinated and targeted attacks and being stealthy enough to escape back to Knothole every time. But if their secret hideout were ever to be revealed, they were cooked. There is nothing they would be able to do to stop him. And although the original Robotnik had the location of Knothole stored on his master computer, remember from when he almost annihilated it during Operation Endgame in issue 50, Eggman couldn't gain access to it because of a virus Nicole had installed onto his computer. So in issue 117, he had finally built new robotic bodies for himself and Snively that were able to access Knothole's location without being infected by the virus. I guess he decided to pay the extra $35 for McAfee antivirus. No, this video isn't sponsored. I mean, this is a pretty significant event in the story. But where does it go? Well, he sent a single Caterkiller to destroy Knothole 2 issues later that Sonic and Tails managed to stop. Okay, what then? Basically nothing. Even during that year-long period when Sonic was in outer space and everyone thought he was dead, Eggman never once invaded Knothole. Why? It would have been easy enough to do it with Sonic there, and now he thinks Sonic is dead. This is the perfect opportunity for him. But no, Sonic comes back a year later, and at that point, Knothole has grown from a straw hut village to a small city. Any run-ins with Dr. Eggman don't really go anywhere from that point on. And it just feels like the story has fallen off, like it's not really going anywhere. It's not until almost 5 years after the issue where he learns about where Knothole is that he actually does something with that knowledge. After another humiliating defeat, Dr. Eggman decides it's time to stop toying with Sonic and break his spirit. So he builds the Egg Fleet, sends it in to destroy the city, and captures all the inhabitants to use to power his own city. He also taunts Sonic, boasting that the Freedom Fighters have never actually been a threat to him, and that he had only been allowing them to continue for this long for his own amusement. Ironically, I think this actually exposes his weakness. If Dr. Eggman hasn't been invading Knothole because he doesn't consider the Freedom Fighters a real threat to his empire, that means his power has declined to the point where he has begun to perceive them as a threat. The Beast was wounded, and now he's slashing out. So when Sonic revealed to Eggman he hadn't lost his will to keep fighting, it seriously caught him off guard. Not only was Sonic still a credible threat to him, but he didn't actually know how to neutralize the threat. And it just kept going downhill from there. Shortly after, he lost his entire Badnik horde, his entire Egg Fleet, and his capital city to the Enerjack. In fact, all the forces still on his side weren't even robots. All that's left are the Dark Legionnaires who had recently decided to join up with them. The Empire has grown unstable, and Eggman himself has grown even more unstable. And taking advantage of his vulnerability, the Freedom Fighters and the Chaotix have decided to launch a full-scale attack on his base of global operations, the Egg Dome. At the very heart of the dome, a demented Eggman awaits Sonic for a final showdown just between the two of them. And that's where we get to issue 200. I find their banter in the midst of their fight to be quite charming. Eggman is madly attempting to prove that he's this all-powerful conqueror, and Sonic is no match for him, while Sonic exposes his weaknesses right before him. And while Eggman keeps trying to provide counterpoints, deep down, he knows Sonic is right. He's not the baddest on the block anymore, the Freedom Fighters are. You can hear the desperation in Eggman's words as Sonic is trashing his mech. "I forbid you! I command you to stop! Stay back! Lose! Die!" It's like a form of regression, like he's crying out to his mommy. He's so used to having everyone around him fear him and obey his every order. And since he knows at this point he has no chance whatsoever of beating Sonic, all he can think to do is just bark orders at him in hopes he'll obey. And when even that fails to save him, he cries out one last time, "I hate that hedgehog," as Sonic smashes him out of the cockpit. And then in his spot, two underdog villains rise up, Snively and Regina. Well, it's really just Regina, because it's very clear that she wears the pants in their relationship. You see what I'm talking about? The Archie story has a central conflict, and the protagonists actually progress towards solving that conflict. Yes, there were a good 5 years or so where things were just kind of... Yes, there were a good 5 or so years where things were going kind of slow, but eventually we got past that. IDW doesn't really have that kind of story. Sometimes the bad guy is Dr. Eggman, sometimes it's Dr. Starline, sometimes it's Mr. Clutch, sometimes it's Surge and Kitsunami, and sometimes it's Mimic. I'm not even going to count Rough and Tumble as legitimate villains. This has become a problem for me because it's kind of ruined my favorite Sonic character, Silver. In the Archie comics, Silver's future had been destroyed by a certain freedom fighter in Sonic's time who had turned traitor. So, in issue 194, he went back to Sonic's time to stop the traitor. And that's the whole reason he's in Sonic's time. And finally, 53 issues later, he changed the past in the way he needed to in order to save his future. In IDW, he accomplished his mission just 30 issues in. And hey, that's great! But now with the future saved, he just couldn't find any purpose in life, because all the friends he ever made were in Sonic's time. So he just decides to live in the past anyway. Like, what? First of all, every time traveler is supposed to know that you're supposed to change as little as possible when you go to the past. He's creating unnecessary risk to his future by remaining in Sonic's time. What was the point in saving the future if you clearly don't care about the people there that you were supposed to be saving? Second, I call bull that Silver wouldn't be able to find purpose in life if he lived in the future. Son, you could have 2 hot sisters, get a job at a Chinese restaurant, and make friends with a ghost. You're giving all that up just because you don't want to outlive all your friends? How sentimental can you get? I think the fact that there is no central conflict in IDW is also the reason that Archie has another thing that IDW kind of lacks in. Character development. Archie and IDW both have tons of exclusive characters, but one thing that I've noticed with Archie is the characters seem to develop a lot, whereas IDW characters are rather static. You could argue this is because IDW hasn't gone on for as long as Archie, and that's fair. But take a look at Antoine, for example. At the beginning of the series, he was basically just a comic relief character. Yeah, he helped out with missions, but at times his cowardice made him more of a liability than anything else. There was even an episode of Sad AM where Sonic was actually fine with letting him get eaten by cannibals. That's how useless he was. But especially after Robotnik was killed in Endgame, Antoine gradually started gaining his spine and becoming more of a valuable asset to the freedom fighters. When it was clear to him Princess Sally loved Sonic and not him, he stopped making goofy advances on her and started having a crush on Bunny. And this wasn't that far out. This was only like 50-something issues in. Now, IDW does have some character development, but it's not quite as stark as it was with Antoine. I think the character who's developed the most in IDW has been Silver. I'll admit, it's kind of cool to see him take up gardening as a hobby, so he can have some new purpose in life. And I think it's adorable how he and Blaze are starting to have a crush on each other. Dr. Eggman has also seemed to undergo some development. Sure, he's still an evil genius, but he seems to have retained a bit of Mr. Tinker's personality in him. He's more sentimental now, and he takes pleasure in harmless hobbies like woodworking. The character that really disappointed me was Amy. She hasn't really developed at all as a character. Unlike Archie, where she starts out as this annoying little girl who loves Sonic and eventually becomes an amazing freedom fighter, this Amy starts out as like this workaholic and then becomes a little bit more carefree. And that's not really a change in her personality, that's just her getting sick of doing all this work that she's been doing. This might be fine if she were in her 30s or something, but her official age is 12 years old. 12! She shouldn't even be driving, let alone leading the restoration. And what does the restoration even do? They clearly have no intention of destroying Eggman's bases, so what's the point in all their training? Just preparing for his next attack and then the next? If that's the case, they should just be the police or the military. Whatever, I'm rambling. Shadow is another character whom I think should have more development, though I know he's legally obligated by Sega to be an arrogant douche now. Honestly, that's a nitpick though. Shadow almost never appears anyway. Now, all this said, I do like IDW a lot, and I'm gonna keep collecting every volume as they come out. Here's a few reasons why. One thing I like especially about IDW is the lack of human characters. I'm among those who believe that there should be no human characters in Sonic except for Dr. Eggman. And I guess Eggman's family if they come up in conversation. The Archieverse has this weird mix of human and animal characters, and it goes deep into how the two groups interact with one another. And I get it's supposed to have like an environmentalist message to it, because when it comes to destroying the environment, it's really all of us who are responsible, and not just one man or corporation. But I prefer it if Dr. Eggman is just kind of the representation of the human world. Another thing I like about IDW more is the aesthetic. Another thing I like about the IDW world is the aesthetic. The Archie Sonic world takes place in the year 3237, and that's not 3237 AD, that's 3237 PXE. That is, years after the Zorda destroyed Earth with their gene bombs. So it's all like sleek and futuristic. I don't really like that. I like it more having the characters live modest, agrarian-type lifestyles. I mean, Eggman can have all the fancy tech, since he's the human, but the animal characters are supposed to be one with nature. So I like how they typically use lower tech than him. That was also something I liked about the world in Sonic X. And finally, I like the separation between the classic and modern elements in IDW. This was a Sega mandate that I actually liked. I'm sick of all the nostalgia baiting in Sonic media. That's why my channel is called MorgyModernSonicFan. Classic Sonic was great, but there won't be a classic Sonic if every classic thing about him exists in the modern franchise. So I think it was a clever idea to have entirely separate stories that revolve around classic Sonic that have no effect on the modern storyline. I just wish Green Hill Zone would have been counted as classic Sonic. But anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. Which do you like better? Archie Sonic or IDW Sonic? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll catch you all next time.